March 3, 1943, 10:14 in the morning. Captain Paul Pappy Gunn shoved the nose of his B-25 Mitchell downward until the altimeter needle dropped below 100 feet. The Bismarck Sea rushed toward him. 50 feet above the waves, the twin engines roared at full throttle, propellers clawing at the humid tropical air as the bomber streaked forward faster than most fighters flew at landing speed. American bombers had been trying to sink Japanese convoys for 14 months. For 14 months, they had mostly failed. B-17 Flying Fortresses flew high above the Pacific, 20,000 feet, sometimes higher, dropping bombs through the clouds at ships that looked like tiny specks on the ocean. The theory said it should work. In reality, the bombs almost always missed. Japanese convoy commanders had learned this quickly. By early 1943, they sailed in daylight. They didn't zigzag much anymore. They didn't panic when American bombers appeared overhead. They knew the bombs would fall harmlessly into the sea. But the aircraft diving toward them now was not a normal bomber. Inside Gunn's B-25, the glass bombardier nose was gone. The bomb sight was gone. The navigator's station was gone. In their place sat a row of heavy machine guns. 12 50-caliber guns pointing straight ahead. No glass nose, no delicate instruments, just raw firepower. Engineers in the United States said the modification couldn't work. Air Force planners had called it impractical. The aircraft's balance would be wrong. The center of gravity would shift forward. The plane would become uncontrollable. The idea had been rejected on paper months earlier. But Paul Gunn had never been good at accepting the word impossible. He was 43 years old, a sixth-grade dropout from Arkansas, a man who had learned to fly before anyone told him he wasn't supposed to. And for the last 14 months, his wife and 4 children had been prisoners of the Japanese in Manila. Everything he loved was trapped behind enemy lines. So Gunn stopped asking for permission. In the next 15 minutes, he would prove every engineer wrong and sink an entire convoy. The first warning that high-altitude bombing didn't work against ships had come a year earlier, February 19, 1942. Darwin Harbor, Northern Australia. Japanese aircraft swept in from the north, attacking the port in waves. Bombs rained down on ships anchored in the harbor. Among them was the American destroyer USS Peary. B-17 bombers scrambled to intercept the Japanese fleet offshore. They climbed to 20,000 feet, found their targets, opened their bomb bay doors, and released their bombs. From that altitude, the bombs took nearly 30 seconds to reach the water. In 30 seconds, a ship moving 15 knots traveled almost 300 yards. The bombs hit empty water. Meanwhile, Japanese aircraft returned again and again. 5 bombs struck the Peary. 88 American sailors died. The B-17s landed with empty bomb bays and nothing to show for it. That was the first lesson. High-altitude bombing against moving ships was almost useless. The second lesson came 3 weeks later, March 10, 1942. Lieutenant James Crawford led a formation of B-17s toward a Japanese convoy off the coast of New Guinea, 4 transport ships, 2 destroyer escorts. Crawford climbed his bombers to 25,000 feet. At that altitude, they were safe from most anti-aircraft guns, safe from fighters, exactly where doctrine said they should be. The formation lined up carefully. Bomb bay doors opened. Bombs fell. 30 seconds later, they splashed into the water behind the convoy. The ships sailed on. Crawford's formation made 3 more passes. 48 bombs dropped, not a single direct hit. Weeks later, those same transports unloaded thousands of Japanese soldiers in New Guinea. Those troops would spend the next 6 months fighting American and Australian forces in brutal jungle combat. Crawford wrote a simple sentence in his report. Accuracy against moving vessels from high altitude is essentially 0. The report was filed. Nothing changed. By mid-1942, the numbers were impossible to ignore. American bombers had flown more than 600 sorties against Japanese shipping. Confirmed hits? Maybe 20. Most of them near misses. A success rate of around 3%. Japanese commanders noticed quickly. Convoys sailed in daylight now. Bombers appeared overhead. Bombs fell around them like rain. The ships continued sailing. Meanwhile, Japanese convoys delivered 40,000 troops to New Guinea. They delivered artillery, fuel, ammunition, food. American soldiers fighting in the jungle paid the price for every missed bomb. They fought fresh Japanese units while running out of supplies themselves. Some pilots knew the truth. Lieutenant Edward Jacobs finished his 32nd mission in May 1942. 32 bombing runs, 0 ships sunk. After landing, he told his crew chief, "We're not bombing ships, we're just dropping bombs into the ocean." The problem wasn't courage. The problem wasn't skill. The problem was physics, and no one in Washington seemed able to solve it.
Then General George Kenney arrived in Australia. August 1942. Kenney took command of the U.S. 5th Air Force and inherited a disaster. Bombers that couldn't hit ships, fighter units stretched thin, Japanese forces advancing across New Guinea. Most commanders would have tried to follow existing doctrine. Kenney didn't care about doctrine. He cared about results. 3 days after arriving, he met a pilot named Paul Gunn. Gunn looked older than most combat pilots. Weathered skin, hard eyes, hands that looked more like a mechanic's than an officer's. Before the war, he had been a civilian airline pilot in the Philippines. When Japan invaded, he had escaped by aircraft. His family had not. They were prisoners now. Kenney listened as Gunn described the problem. American bombers flew too high. Ships moved too fast. Bombs missed. Then Gunn described his solution. Fly low, very low. Use forward-firing guns to suppress the ship's gunners, then drop bombs directly at the waterline. Kenney leaned back in his chair. Most officers would have dismissed the idea. Gunn had already been told it wouldn't work. But Kenney had learned something about war. The people who solved problems were rarely the ones who wrote the manuals. Finally, he said, "I don't want you flying cargo anymore. I want you figuring out how to sink ships." Gunn grinned slightly. He had already started. The aircraft he chose was the B-25 Mitchell, a medium bomber. 5 crew, twin engines, designed for level bombing from altitude. Exactly the wrong tool for attacking ships. But Gunn saw something different. He saw space. The bombardier sat inside a glass nose that served no purpose if you weren't bombing from high altitude. Behind him was unused room inside the fuselage, room for weapons. Gunn had a simple idea. Fill that space with machine guns, not defensive guns, forward-firing guns, enough to sweep the deck of a ship clean before the bomber reached bomb release distance. He took the idea to the engineering officers. They laughed. Major William Pfizer, chief engineering officer at Townsville, told him it was impossible. 8 machine guns in the nose would add nearly 800 pounds. That much weight forward would shift the center of gravity. The aircraft would become dangerously nose-heavy. Pfizer didn't even bother calculating. He simply said it couldn't work. Gunn asked for a damaged aircraft so he could test the idea. The request was denied. No unauthorized modifications allowed. So Gunn found a wrecked B-25 anyway and started rebuilding it himself. The hangar at Townsville was quiet after midnight. Most of the mechanics had gone to sleep. The tropical heat lingered inside the metal structure, mixed with the smell of oil, fuel, and aluminum dust. Paul Gunn worked alone under a flashlight. The damaged B-25 sat in the corner like a skeleton waiting to be rebuilt. He started with the nose. The glass panels came out first, then the bombardier's seat. The Norden bomb sight followed, along with the navigation table and wiring boxes. One piece at a time, he stripped the front of the aircraft down to bare metal. When he finished, the space was larger than he expected. 3 feet deep, 4 feet wide. Plenty of room for guns. He scavenged 4 heavy .50 caliber machine guns from a wrecked P-40 fighter.
Each one weighed more than 60 pounds. Mounting them inside the nose required cutting holes through the aluminum skin with a hacksaw. The guns were installed in pairs, 2 above, 2 below, all pointing straight ahead. The difficult part was ammunition. Each gun needed long belts of cartridges feeding smoothly into the receivers. If the belts twisted or jammed, the guns would fail in combat. But Gunn spent 3 nights solving that problem. His hands bled from sharp metal edges. Mosquitoes swarmed around the hangar lights. His back ached from crawling inside the cramped nose section, but he kept working. Every night he imagined his children in that prison camp in Manila. Every improvement he made felt like a step closer to revenge. By the 4th night, the guns were mounted. The belts fed smoothly. The triggers were wired to the pilot's control column. 4 guns firing together produced an astonishing amount of firepower. But Gunn wasn't satisfied. The B-25 already carried 2 forward-firing machine guns in the upper fuselage. He wired those into the same trigger system. Now the aircraft had 6 guns firing straight ahead. Still not enough. He added 2 more mounted externally along the sides of the fuselage just below the cockpit. They stuck out in streamlined pods that mechanics jokingly called package guns. The aircraft looked ugly, but now it carried 10 forward-firing machine guns. Later models would carry even more. Some eventually reached 18. The firepower was enormous. A 3-second burst could throw 200 pounds of lead into a target. More firepower than an entire infantry platoon. Major Pfizer discovered the unauthorized modification about a week later. He was furious. The work violated every maintenance regulation in the book. The aircraft, he insisted, would never fly properly. The weight distribution was wrong. The nose would be too heavy. It would stall and crash on takeoff. Gunn didn't argue. He simply climbed into the cockpit and started the engines. Mechanics gathered outside. Pfizer stood on the tarmac watching. The bomber rolled forward, lifted smoothly off the runway, and climbed into the sky without the slightest problem. An hour later, Gunn landed perfectly. Pfizer never admitted he was wrong, but he stopped trying to shut the project down. The guns solved one part of the problem. They allowed the aircraft to strafe ships. They could sweep the decks clean of anti-aircraft gunners. But machine guns alone could not sink a transport ship. Bombs were still required. And bombs dropped from altitude still missed. So Gunn introduced another idea: skip bombing. The concept had originally been experimented with by the British. The principle was simple. Instead of dropping a bomb from thousands of feet, release it just above the water while flying fast and low. The bomb would strike the water like a flat stone and skip forward, 1 bounce, sometimes 2, then slam into the side of a ship at the waterline. The waterline was the ship's weakest point. Armor was thick on deck, where bombs fell from above, but the hull sides near the waterline were thin. A 500-pound bomb exploding there could rip open the engine room or fuel tanks. 1 bomb, 1 ship. But to release a bomb that low meant flying directly toward the target at barely 50 feet altitude. Any surviving anti-aircraft gunner would have a perfect shot. That's where the forward guns mattered. The attack sequence was brutally simple. Approach the ship at 50 feet above the water. At 1,500 yards, open fire. 10 or 12 machine guns hammering the deck. Anti-aircraft gunners killed at their weapons. Crewmen diving for cover. At 300 yards, Gunn released his bombs. The bombs struck the water, skipped once, skipped again, then smashed into the hull of the ship. Gunn yanked the controls back. The B-25 roared over the ship's mast with barely 20 feet to spare. 5 seconds later, the bombs detonated inside the ship. The transport's hull split open near the waterline. Smoke erupted. The ship began to sink. From the bridge of another transport, Captain Sata Yoshida watched in disbelief. For over a year, American bombers had been harmless. Now aircraft were attacking at wave height, guns blazing, bombs skipping across the water like stones. He had never seen anything like it. Within minutes, another B-25 streaked toward his ship. Its guns opened fire. Forward gun crews disappeared in explosions of metal and splintered wood. Then the bombs struck. Water flooded the engine rooms. The ship began to roll. Within 10 minutes, it vanished beneath the waves. Yoshida survived. Most of his crew did not. From the water, he watched transport after transport die the same way. Bombers screaming in low, guns tearing across the decks, bombs skipping into the hulls. The attack lasted 15 minutes. When it ended, the sea was covered in burning wreckage. 8 transports sunk, 4 destroyers sunk, 4 more damaged. Of the 6,900 Japanese soldiers, fewer than 1,200 survived. American losses were 13 airmen. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea became one of the most devastating air-sea victories of the Pacific War. Japanese commanders were stunned. Never again would they risk large daylight convoys to New Guinea. Supply routes collapsed overnight. The strategic balance in the region shifted immediately, all because one man had ignored the rules. Back in the United States, engineers still insisted Gunn's modification should not work, but when reports arrived showing that 12 modified B-25s had destroyed an entire convoy, the argument ended. The aircraft entered production as the B-25 Strafer. Hundreds were built, all based on the idea that engineers had once called impossible. Paul Gunn kept flying combat missions until 1944. He was wounded 9 times. His family remained prisoners in Manila for 3 years. His daughter, only 9 years old, secretly carried messages for the Filipino resistance inside the prison camp. In February 1945, American forces liberated the camp. Gunn finally saw his family again. After the war, he helped rebuild Philippine Airlines. He kept flying until the end of his life. In October 1957, his aircraft crashed during a storm in the Philippines. He was 57 years old. The official histories often credit the aircraft manufacturer for developing the B-25 Strafer, but the pilots who flew them knew the truth. The idea had come from one stubborn man working alone in a hangar at midnight, a man who refused to believe that the rules of war could not be rewritten. Sometimes the most powerful weapons are not invented by committees. They are built by someone who refuses to accept that something cannot be done.